Hi everyone, I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. And if you have been following along on my page for a while, or if you're in my big group on Facebook, then you know that I'm always focusing on the beginner. And my main focus is always how do I make this easy? How do I simplify this? And so what I've done is I've created a set of basic essential processes that are meant to be simplified and easy for beginners. The beginner bread recipe is a very low hydration recipe, and it's pared down to just do these very basic things and use this recipe to practice with until you get really comfortable. Today, I'm actually going to do a loaf that I would consider to be quite advanced, but I think it's valid to beginners so that beginners can understand. So when we're in the group, we see lots of people saying, I want to do whole wheat, or I'm trying to do this, and I'm seeing these struggles or problems or whatever it may be. So before I even start mixing this loaf, I just want to clarify. If you're a beginner and you're new to sourdough, we recommend that you practice with the beginner bread recipe. And in the description of this video, I've linked this whole giant long list of all of the tutorials that we've created for beginners. The beginner bread recipe uses mostly all-purpose flour or all-purpose flour or a basic flour like bread flour. It's got a low starter amount, a low water amount. It's really easy to manage, but if you're starting to feel a little bit more confident, or if you're totally against using all-purpose flour but you're still a beginner, this video might help you a little bit. So what I'm going to make today is a 100% wheat and sturdy grain loaf. So I'm going to use all-purpose whole wheat flour, and I'm also going to use some super grains. So this one has oats, flax, and quinoa. And I'm going to use some steel cut oats in this loaf. And as I mix it up, I'm just going to talk about how this process is going to differ just slightly from the beginner bread recipe process. So first of all, the beginner bread recipe calls for 120 grams of starter, 680 grams of water, 1,000 grams of flour, and 20 grams of salt, and that's for a 2-loaf recipe. Today I'm going to make a single loaf recipe. So for this single loaf, I'm going to use 100 grams of starter. I'm going to use 370 grams of water, 500 grams of these sturdy flours, and 10 grams of salt. Hi, Jim. I'm glad you're here. Um, Jim, I think it might be you who likes all the sturdy flours, so maybe this one's for you. So what do we need to know about whole wheat? Sturdy flours suck up more water. So in order to have success with a sturdier flour recipe, you're going to have a higher hydration. Higher hydration is a little bit tougher for beginners to manage, but I think we can get through this. Sturdier flours are also going to rise faster. So the bulk proofing success method that we use with the proofing containers is going to be really important. So if it's your first time ever mixing a high whole wheat or high spelt or rye volume recipe, then you're going to really want to be able to watch your dough while it bulk proofs. So let's get started. Well, first of all, show you my starter. It's very happy. It's bubbly. This is Mama. She's been around forever. She's in all my videos. I take very good care of her, look after her. So I fed her last night before bed. She has peaked and already begun to fall. I like to use my starter a little bit past peak because that adds a little bit more sour flavor to my bread. So I'm going to scoop 100 grams of starter out of Mama and into my bowl. Now, the beginner bread recipe, if you were doing a single loaf, would use 340 grams of water. The level 2 hydration recipe, if you were going to make a single loaf, would use 350 grams of water. Because this is going to be a very high wheat content, I'm going to use 370 grams of water today. So let's just get that poured in. I'm on a well. But I do have a water softener that adds salt to my water. I'm just using tap water. You can use any water you like, but I think that it's a myth that you can't use tap water because there's chlorine in it. If you would drink it, it's going to work for your bread, just like you can use bleached all-purpose. Lots of myths out there. My whole thing is, how do we keep it simple? Some of those myths are actually weren't originally meant to be myths. They were best practices. Someone said, hey, like if you've got access to better water and better flour, then you absolutely should do that, and your bread's going to be amazing if you do. But through some sort of broken telephone, these things became rules, and all the time we see people saying you can't use this, and it's not true. And my starters are in plastic containers. I mix in metal bowls with metal whisks. I use tap water. I guess I'm just a rule breaker. So what I've done is I've taken my 100 grams of starter and my 370 grams of water, and I've blended them together into like a milky sort of foamy substance. It's hard to show you guys inside the bowl without dumping it everywhere, but I think you get the idea. Okay, now we're going to add our flour, water, and salt. So I'm going to turn my scale back to 0. So what I want is a total of 500 grams of flour, but I'm going to use these grains as part of my 500 grams. So I don't really have much left in here. This is my super grains, oats, flax, and quinoa. So I'm going to dump that in. That was about 65 grams. And then I'm going to put some of these steel cut oats in. Get those opened. So these are 3-minute steel cut oats. So I'm just going to top myself up to about 120 grams total. I'm liking how that's looking. 110. Okay, so I had about 65 grams of the oats. I've got another 55 grams of these, so I'm at 109 grams, and I'm going to top the rest up with all whole wheat flour. So I'm going to get to 500 grams. Just dump it on in. I like using a scale. I don't think it's necessary at all. There's lots of recipes and cups out there. I've converted a lot of my recipes to cups, but I like the scale because I don't actually have to measure. I can just stand here and pour. If for that reason only, the $12 to purchase the scale on Amazon was worth every penny. But of course, there's lots of scientific and fantastic reasons why you could use a scale to make things better. But I personally just like the ease of it. So I've got 500 grams of whole wheat flour mixed with some super grains, and heavy hard grains. And now I'm going to add 10 grams of salt right on top. So what I'm doing here is I am combining an advanced process with the beginner methods, right? So if you follow me at all, then you know that I'm like, hey, keep it simple, like make it super easy, right? And that I've reduced everything down to this set of like basic essential processes, right? If you haven't been following me for very long, here's the summary. Only do what you need to do. Keep it super simple. It doesn't need to be crazy, right? Just mix your starter and water together, dump your flour and salt in, mix them up, get a shaggy dough, stretch and fold them a bunch of times, do an excellent job bulk proofing, pre-shape, shape, bake. Skip everything else, right? Practice this until you're comfortable, and then start adding in those advanced processes. Then start learning about levains. Then start learning about auto-leasing. Then start considering cold proofing, right? But at first, let's keep it super simple. So what I'm doing with this loaf, which I would consider to be an advanced loaf, and I'll tell you why. Whole wheat flours suck up more water, so you have to go with a higher hydration. Well, you don't have to, but you should, right? They rise, they bulk proof much faster, so you really need to keep an eye on them. And they're just, finicky in general. They're harder to work with than a simple all-purpose flour. I am going to stick to the basic essentials with this loaf, right? So I'm not going to auto-lease the flour. I'm not going to wait to add my salt till later. You know what I mean? I may or may not cold proof this. In fact, I don't usually do a heavy whole wheat based loaf. So I actually know for a fact that I'm not going to bulk proof this. We often recommend that beginners skip bulk proofing at first until they've mastered the essential processes, right? And if you know my videos at all, that's all you're ever going to hear out of my mouth is the essential processes, the essential processes. I wrote a whole book on it. It's linked in the description, right? because this is a new thing for me, because I haven't necessarily done this exact mix before, I'm going to skip cold proofing. And the reason why is because if you mess something up in the bulk proofing stage, or your shaping isn't great, or you did something wrong or out of order, cold proofing is just going to magnify that. It's just going to make the problem worse, right? So let's just eliminate that step, which, by the way, cold proofing is excellent and wonderful. It's going to add flavor to your bread. It's going to make that gluten structure so much more fermented. It's a good thing, but just at first until you're comfortable. So what I've done is I've taken my starter and my water. I've added these amazing sturdy grains to my mix and some flour. I've got it to a shaggy mix with my spoon. I'm just going to use my hand right now and get this mixed really well. So what we're looking for is a nice sort of shaggy dough. And then what are we going to do next? Well, I'm going to stay on this live for a little bit here, and I'm going to get us to our first stretch and fold. And while I'm standing here, I'm just going to explain what these essential processes are over the course of the day. And oh man, these oats in this bread look amazing. So I have a brother-in-law. His name is Jason. He's incredibly intelligent. He's constantly researching. Anytime I ever want to do something, he's always in there helping me and learning things. And he really likes the idea of only eating whole wheat flour. He doesn't, so I don't know if you know, but here in Canada, by law, under order of the government, all of our non-whole wheat flour is enriched, which means that they have added niacin, iron, thiamine, mononitrate, riboflavin, and folic acid. I don't know if I said all of those, but by law, all of our non-whole wheat flours have to have that in it, including everything that goes into any processed foods that we might purchase. And my brother does not love that. So he likes the idea of only eating bread that only has whole wheat in it. But I'm always saying it's really hard to make whole wheat sourdough. So I'm hoping and praying that this loaf is going to turn out fantastic, and then I'm going to gift it to my brother-in-law to taste test and tell me what I need to change. So, stretching and folding. Stretching and folding builds strength into your dough. And I actually just mixed in a basic beginner bread recipe on a YouTube live a minute ago. I'm doing back-to-back lives just to cover both the places where followers are. So I'll show you stretching and folding. So this dough was mixed about 45 minutes ago to a shaggy dough. This is just your regular 120 grams of starter, 680 grams of water, 1,000 grams of flour, and 20 grams of salt. This is about to be my second stretch and fold. When we're stretching and folding, what we're doing is we're getting the gluten structures to adhere and get entangled with each other, and we're building strength in the bread. So if you look at this dough, if I grab it right now and try to pick it up, right, it just comes apart, right? You can't grab the dough and have it sort of come together in one piece. As we do stretching and folding, we are building strength into our dough, and eventually you'll be able to grab this huge ball of dough and pick it up, and the whole thing will come together. There's lots of different ways to know that you've stretched and folded enough, but with the beginner bread recipe, we just say, just do it 4 times. That's for sure enough, and don't worry about understanding how just yet. Over time, you'll be able to feel it with your hand. So this dough here is about to have its second stretch and fold. So watch in comparison to that one that I just grabbed that hasn't been stretched and folded at all. As you can see, the dough is starting to become more one. It's less likely to rip. It's starting to hold together. So what we're saying for all of our recipes, the essential process is to stretch and fold your dough with 30 minutes rest in between each stretch and fold, 3 to 4 times, and then proceed with bulk proofing. And I'll cover how to bulk proof and what bulk proofing is in just a minute here. So as you can see with this dough, if I pick it up, right, it's just completed its second stretch and fold. It's starting to hold together as one ball. It will rip eventually because it's not quite strong enough yet. But even just as you get to only the second stretch and fold, you can already see how much stronger the dough is. I'm just going to set this one aside for now, and I think we'll be able to get to at least our first stretch and fold with the whole wheat that we've just mixed. And by the way, lots of people on the live, welcome. Thanks for being here. If you've got any questions, ask them. I'm happy to answer while I'm here. Okay, so let's refeed our starters. So I keep 2 starters all the time. I've got 750 ml or 3-cup deli containers. I just rescued them after they had pickles in them, gave them a good clean. I usually keep I never really let my base go below 50 grams, but my starter is active, it's healthy, it's strong, it's been around for a really long time. Her name's Mama, she's kind of famous, she's in all my videos. So generally what I do with my starters is feed them what I think I'm going to need. So right now I'm mixing 3 loaves of bread. I'm probably going to mix a couple more tomorrow and get myself set up so that I don't have to mix through the week. So I'm going to feed each of these starters a little bit differently. I had taken 200 grams out of this starter earlier today and left myself with a very small amount left over. Whereas with this starter, I only took 100 grams. So I'm going to feed this guy 50 grams each of flour and water, and I'm going to feed this guy 100 grams each of flour and water. That's going to give me 300 grams total, so 100 there and 200 here that I can use tomorrow without having to worry about going under. These are both the same starter. The only reason I keep 2 jars is because I make a lot, right? And as long as your starter has room to sort of triple, you can keep your lid tightly sealed, and a tightly sealed lid prevents mold and fruit flies and everything else, right? So you kind of want your jar to be much bigger than what your starter is to allow for it to double and triple during the fermentation process, and also to allow some air to move around in there. Sometimes when I come out, my lid will kind of be domed because there's science happening in the bowl. Just giving yourself some room makes it better. So I'm going to stick my starter jar on the scale. I'm going to tare it to 0. And for this one, I'm going to grab about 100 grams of flour. So I'm just going to dump it in. You don't have to be super accurate once your starter is established. The only time that accuracy really matters is when you're trying to get a starter to activate, or when you're new and you don't really understand what the heck is happening. But once you're super comfortable with sourdough, then you'll kind of just get a feel for what everything needs. So 100 grams of flour in there. Now I'm going to add 100 grams of water here. I just made a post yesterday, and essentially what the post said was, you know, if you're at day 10 or more of trying to activate a new starter and it's not doubling, you know, it's bubbly, but it still hasn't started to double consistently every feed, but it smells super alcoholic. The post is this long, but essentially the answer is it just is hungry. It needs more flour, right? And sometimes people start sourdough and they figure out and understand that they need a starter. They don't necessarily understand what a starter is, right? A sourdough starter is no different than vodka, right? You want to make some vodka, you take some potatoes, you ferment them, you leave them until they turn to liquid. Ta-da, you have vodka, right? Flour and water together begin to ferment. They create, you know, carbon monoxide and all kinds of cool bacterias and everything else within them. And this creates a rise process, right? So with a starter, all we're using is fermented flour and water. But what we need the starter to do is to help our bread to rise. And so the important thing is to get our starter to a point where it's not turning into alcohol so quickly. Once something is alcohol, you're not going to get as much of a rise as when it's still sort of in that active eating phase. So if your starter is new and has never risen yet, and you're trying to get it to activate and it reeks like acetone, nail polish remover, alcohol, right? Just give it lots of flour, right? Just give it a big flour heavy feed. Make it so you have to be like, with your muscles. And I bet you any money it'll wake up. Okay, so this one I'm just going to give 50 grams each of flour and water. Okay, 50. And we'll tear this back. I'm making a huge mess of my counter. Now we're just going to mix those up. So when I first feed my starter, it's quite thick, right? Like it's like thick and dry and chunky. And then if you were to rewind this video and look at how my starter looked when I first showed it to you before I baked with it, it starts to get super bubbly and active, but it also becomes more liquid. As your starter eats through its flour, the more liquid it becomes, the more alcohol it becomes. And, you know, starters are cool things, and you can really experiment with them. You can give them more flour to reduce the sour taste. You can give them less flour to increase the sour taste. But once you understand that all you're doing is operating on a timeline of fermentation and what fermentation is, then you can start to really mess around with these. So what I'm going to do with these starters now, since I just fed them, is I'm going to leave them sitting on the counter until they double in size, and then I'm going to pop them in the fridge. And then tomorrow morning when I want to bake, they'll have gone into the fridge at peak, and the fridge will kind of like slow down that fermentation so much that it's almost like they were on pause. And then tomorrow when I'm ready to bake, I'm going to basically just pull them out of the fridge and dump them straight into my dough. People always ask, do I change my jars every feed? No, I do not, but I'm going to show you this jar. I don't know if you can see it, but there is a slice on the tip of my finger that hurts so bad because this jar is starting to get really crunchy around the top. So actually I can probably just do it right now. I'll show you what I do. So every 3 or 4 weeks, my jar starts to get kind of crusty and nasty. And this is the first time, like the dried flour gets so hard that there's nothing I can do to scrape it off. Yesterday, it like sliced my finger open right on the tip of my finger, and it hurts so bad. So I looked at this jar yesterday and I told it, that's it, you're done. I'm changing you. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this starter and dump it into a clean jar like this. Scrape it out like this. So I always sort of keep like 3 or 4 of these bigger jars on hand. I'm just going to scrape my starter out of here like this and put it into this nice clean jar. So there we go. Now this starter is got a new clean home, and I'll probably keep it like this for 3 to 4 months or so. So I'm just going to give this one a good wash and clean so that it can't cut my finger again. And I'll just mark the height of my starter with this elastic. So we just use this elastic, and I mean, I probably don't even need it anymore because I'm so used to how my starter looks when it's ready, but I just mark the height of my starter when I fed it, and so then when it gets up here, I know it's doubled, right? That's all we're trying to do. Let's find a lid for this starter. Here we go. So Mama number one's got a fresh, clean jar. Probably with this starter, what I'll do is I'll wash that jar that I just took this out of and transfer this to that and wash this one, and I end up giving them away or whatever it may be. Okay, so our super whole wheat, ancient grain, oat, insane bread is mixed. We have stretched and folded our regular beginner recipe bread. This has been sitting here for a while. I wonder if this thing will tell me how long I've been on for. Let's assume it's been 30 minutes. So you mix your dough, you let it sit for 30 minutes, and then you begin the stretch and fold process. You rest for 30 minutes, stretch and fold, rest for 30 minutes, stretch and fold 4 times. Then we're going to transfer our dough to the bulk proofing containers. So I'm just going to show you a stretch and fold with this dough, and then I'll tell you about the bulk proofing containers. Now, in the description of this video are all of the tutorials that we've created. So if you're new to sourdough, we recommend definitely starting with the beginner bread recipe. If you're trying to understand the process of sourdough, we definitely recommend the ebook that covers the essential processes. There's just tons and tons of tutorials that we've created for you, and they're all there. These lives are cool because you get the opportunity to ask questions and see what's happening, but there's lots there to actually learn. So Karen says you can let it dry in container and then have dehydrated starter. Karen, I actually did a whole bunch of tutorials on dehydrated. What I actually do is I just take mine and spread it out on parchment paper and let it sit till it's dried. And then what I get, I don't know if I have any here, what I get is this like crumpled up dehydrated starter. So I sell Mama on Etsy to people who don't want to make their own starter, who just want to skip that process. So what I do is I dehydrate her like this, right? And then on parchment paper. So down on the Facebook page and on the YouTube channel, there's actually a whole thing about dehydrating starter. So Natty says, why does the dough spread before baking? Okay, so Natty, you want to make sure that you do a really good job during bulk proofing, which means that the point after stretching and folding and before shaping, where you're allowing your dough to rise on the counter. Usually if the dough is spreading out before you're trying to bake it, it's overproofed. And I'll just cover that a little bit more in a few minutes here. Karen says also makes cleaning easier. Yeah, I usually just like keep mixing my starters in the jars until the jar just gets so crusty that I can't scrape it down anymore, pop it into a clean jar and clean it out. Okay, so we mixed this dough. It's been sitting here for a while, so we're going to give it its first stretch and fold. So to stretch and fold, we reach underneath our dough, we pull it up, we flip it down on top of it. So right now, if I pull, the dough is going to rip, it's going to fall apart. As we stretch and fold, that stops, right? So even watch now. It's only the first stretch and fold. So you guys watched earlier, I tried to pick up the dough, it just like tore apart. Stretching and folding is building strength, and we see strength start to develop in the dough almost immediately as soon as we start stretching and folding. So you can imagine that if this dough, just from being mixed 20 minutes ago to now, went from something you couldn't pick up and hold to this, and it will slide, right? Then it's already building strength. You probably also noticed when I first mixed the dough that it was like super sticking to my hand. It's now sticking less. So Amber says, I've been doing a sandwich loaf and I'm loving the flavor and texture. I love sandwich loaves too. And you know what? Sandwich loaves can be coaxed into going so much faster than sourdough. Sometimes, if I'm failing at an experiment that I'm doing in sourdough, I love to just grab a good discard recipe just to rebuild my confidence, right? There's a lot of recipes that you can use sourdough starter in out there that are so much easier than the actual sourdough bread. And if I have a series of fails with something that I'm working on for sourdough bread, then what I'll do is I'll go grab a good discard recipe. And by the way, up in the description of this video, I've posted a whole bunch of discard recipes. We've written a discard recipe book that's got some amazing ones. It's a great way to build confidence. So you just saw how that dough, which had its first stretch and fold, acted. I'm going to show you how this dough, which is about to have its third stretch and fold, is going to act so that you can kind of see how the dough adjusts. Natty says 5 hours in the refrigerator and it spreads. Why? Okay, so Natty, here's the processes in order, okay? And just bear with me. You feed your starter, right? Your starter's active, you're good to go. You mix your dough, you rest and stretch and fold 4 times, then you bulk proof. Bulk proofing should be done on the counter, not in the fridge, and it usually takes between 4 and 8 hours. We're looking for our dough to rise to double if we're not going to cold proof, or 75% if we are going to cold proof. We often recommend that beginners skip cold proofing until they've mastered the essential processes, because if you screwed something up during the bulk proofing phase, the cold proofing is only going to magnify this, okay? So we pop our dough into bulk proofing containers, we mark their height, we watch them, we stop them at 100%, right? Then we take our dough out. It's going to be sticky, right? We pre-shape it, we get some tension built into it, then we shape it. If you're pulling your dough out of the fridge after 5 hours, something happened somewhere where your dough overproofed. So Natty, if you want to go into the comments and kind of like explain what your whole process is from the beginning, I can almost always just read it and see exactly where you went wrong. Or the easier thing is for me to say, set aside what you're doing right now, right? Because it's not working. You keep having this problem over and over again. So set aside the process that you're using right now and try the beginner bread recipe. Just try to get those processes down, and I think it'll sort out where you're getting that stickiness. But usually, if the dough won't hold its shape and it's falling and it's sticky and it's flat, then it's overproofed. You're welcome. You're welcome. Natty, definitely detail it out, and I'll be in here after the fact checking comments and everything else and help you with that. So this dough is going to get its third stretch and fold. So watch this. When I go under now, see how much less give this dough has? See how the dough looks smooth, and when it moves around in the bowl, it's staying all one piece, right? We're getting really good strength built into this dough, right? And now watch this also. So much less dough stuck to my hands. This feeling, right, that we get from the dough, we can only get with practice, right? We can only get this by having our hands getting used to feeling how the dough feels. So watch this. Let me just get these nice and moist. Look at this dough. See how it's elastic? See how it won't rip? It stays together. That whole thing, compared to when you first mix the dough, it would rip. That's what stretching and folding is doing. It's building strength so that when your dough rises, it's strong and it's all developing together. Amanda says, I wonder if I'm having that same issue, Natty. Mine's always really sticky. You probably both are. And so I'm just going to explain what the next process is after stretching and folding, which if we hang around for a little while here, I can almost get this first dough separated into our bulk proofing containers. So we have a video. It's linked in the description of this video called Bulk Proofing Success. 9 times out of 10, if you're not having starter problems and you are having bread problems, 9 times out of 10, the Bulk Proofing Success video is going to fix your problems. Okay? Here's the deal. Your dough has to rise. It shouldn't rise in the fridge. It should rise in the counter after stretching and folding. There's other rises that can be done, right? Your dough will rise more if you cold proof it, but let's just say if we're only going to do the essential processes. You mix your dough, you build strength into your dough by stretching and folding. Now you need to let your dough rise, right? People will mix their dough up in this big bowl and then leave it to rise in this big bowl. Sourdough does not rise like yeast bread, right? I think it's because I'm not using my starter at the correct time, maybe. Amanda, it's probably not that. It's very unlikely that it is that. It could be, but it's probably not. It's more likely that you're letting your dough rise for too long. So as soon as you mix starter with flour, the fermentation process begins. In fact, that's called bulk fermentation. Bulk proofing comes after stretching and folding. And what that is where the dough starts to rise. Lots of people will let their dough rise in a bowl like this, but sourdough expands, not rises. We use the word rise, with yeast bread. If you're familiar with yeast bread, the dough just kind of goes like this, right? Sourdough goes like this, right? So people will have their dough in a big bowl like this, and then later they'll say it's not rising, right? But in fact, it did rise. What it did first was settled, and then it started to expand out sideways. And this bowl is on an angle, and so you can't see the rise. And then the other thing that we see is when you go on Google and you type in sourdough recipe, there's a couple of recipes that are the most popular on the internet. We see them all the time in the group. The recipes themselves are sound. Almost all of the instructions in the recipe are sound. But both of them say, let your dough bulk proof on the counter overnight. It's too long. I mean, unless your house is freezing, bulk proofing only takes between 4 and 8 hours. And there's a million factors that can affect that. If it's a higher wheat content, it's going to take less time. If it's warmer in your house, it's going to take less time. If it's colder in your house, it's going to take more time. You can't put a time on bulk proofing. You really have to just watch for the dough to get to this rise percentage. And if you use the bulk proofing success method with these containers, you can much more dramatically see how much the dough has risen. And then you can also experiment with Yeah, Amanda, I know. So Amanda just said, "Oh yeah, that's it. I'm letting it sit too long." I know you are. And the reason I know you are is because this is what everybody does. The two most popular sourdough recipes on the internet both suggest doing it. And it's just it's just we have 565,000 members in the group now, 25,000 followers on here. We've got the YouTube channel. We've got 8 admins and mods, and all we do is a practice and experiment and try to understand why these same questions are coming up all the time. And 90% of the time, if your dough is sticky and it's falling, it's because you're overproofing it. You're letting it sit too long. So take your dough after your final stretch and fold, and I'm going to do that with this dough right here in just a minute. Separate it into your bulk proofing containers. This is a double mix of dough. This is a single mix of dough. We're going to get it into the actual size that our loaf is. We're going to push it in here. We're going to mark its height. As a beginner, we recommend that you skip cold proofing. So that means what you're going to do is let your dough double in size. The neat thing is going to be that your marker line is going to be up here in the center of the bowl. It'll be down here over here. By the time your dough is doubled, it's actually only like say a finger width above this middle high point, right? But it'll be, when it first went in, there'll have been voids here. It won't have been touching the edge of the thing. The dough expands outwards and upwards. And what we're looking for is for it to double, right? So if your dough's sticky, it's overproofed. And if it's overproofed and you can't figure out why, the easiest way to troubleshoot that and experiment with whether you need 30% rise or 75% rise or 100% rise based on your conditions is to use the same consistent method every time and then just start experimenting with where you're going to stop it, right? I've actually let my bread rise all the way to the top of this bowl before, right? It was significantly overproofed, but then pre-shaping becomes something that can actually help you with a dough that's overproofed. So at that sticky phase, if it's already too late and your dough is overproofed and it's sticky, then pre-shaping can help to fix that dough at least a little bit so that you can bake it, right? And then you get it shaped. And then there's also hot scoring that can help encourage some oven spring for dough that otherwise wouldn't spring. Susan, seems to be my issue also, 10 to 12 hours. Some sites say. Yes, they do. And I really think that's too long. I would say for every one house that requires a 10 to 12 hour rise, 15 houses don't. So definitely try this. Definitely go in the description of this video. Click bulk proofing success. Try this method. I'm going to show it to you guys in just a few minutes here. Just try it. Just experiment with it. And I think that for 8 of 10 people who say that they're having this issue, it will fix it. Some people it won't, and we're happy to help troubleshoot what else might be wrong. I found that out overnight. Definitely why it was so sticky. Yeah. Sorry, guys. I actually don't like to criticize anybody else who ever makes sourdough because, like I said, there's a lot of techniques that can be used, and they're all valid. I'm just going to stretch this dough one more time while I'm talking. All of these things are valid, right? There are times where a super long bulk proof like that might be something that you should do, right? But what I'm saying is that for beginners, there's just too much information there to get into a cohesive system that is going to make it so that you can get to successful loaves. So what we say is use these basic essential processes until you master your loaves. Then start adding other processes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put our second stretch and fold on the dough that we just mixed at the beginning of this video, and then I'm going to separate these doughs into the bulk proofing containers so that you can see that process. And like I said, there's a million, individual tutorials for each thing in the description of this video, pinned to the top of the Facebook page if you're following it, in the Sourdough for Beginners group, pinned at the top of that. There's all of these tutorials, and each one broken down into its individual thing. They're all there, and we kind of stay pretty consistent in our process. So this dough here, I mixed at the beginning of this video. It's basically 100% full grain, right? It's almost all whole wheat, and then I've actually added some oat, quinoa to it. So this is a very high volume of very sturdy flour. And so what I've done to compensate for that is added more flour, and I'm going to really watch it closely during the bulk proofing process. Amanda says, yeah, most recipes say rise overnight. I'm definitely going to try it this way. You're amazing. Why, thank you. I don't actually feel amazing. I just like doing this stuff, and I'm like I like to experiment with things. I like to really understand, and I actually find this really fun. This is a good Saturday afternoon between hockey practices for me. Um, and yes, a lot of recipes say overnight. I'm sure that if you spoke to the person who wrote the recipe, they can explain to you why. And I believe that they truly are trying to help. You know what I mean? I just find that in most cases, it's not going to work. Okay. So let's get this dough into the bulk proofing containers. And I can explain it 1,000 times and you can watch the video, but I think that just watching it done and sort of the little nuances that I do might just help you along the way. So I've got my 2 bulk proofing containers here. This is a double loaf recipe. Right? I've stretched and folded this 3 or 4 times. I haven't really been letting the big long 30-minute waits in between because I'm doing a video, but there's lots of good strength in there. Can you overstretch and fold? I've wondered that too. I guess. I guess so. It would more than overstretching and folding. If you take too long stretching and folding, your dough has already begun to rise, right? And so then if your dough has already begun to rise and then you put it into the bulk proofing containers and that's the base you're going off of, then you might get an overproof. But in general, no. Just do it 3 or 4 times. How do they keep the dough in the refrigerator for 12 hours or more if my dough is after 5 hours overproofed? Okay, Natty, I don't know what your process is, right? I don't know by the time your dough goes into the fridge whether you've built enough strength through stretching and folding. I don't know if you've bulk proofed on the counter before. I don't know. But if you're doing the processes properly, if you're not missing anything and everything is working for you, then you can mix your dough, stretch and fold it, bulk proof it, pre-shape it, shape it, get it into bannetons, and leave it in the fridge for anywhere between 8 and 36 hours and bake your bread and it will be correct. Somewhere in there, there's a process that's getting to be a little bit off. It's hard to say, Maddie, what yours is, but like I said, if you want to type it out, I'll definitely try and help you. Yeah, about every 30 minutes. So with this one, I've just been kind of messing around with it because I've mixed this one live and I want to show you guys the processes. So what I'm going to do with this dough is, first of all, I'm just going to give it a quick little stretch and fold because that makes the dough kind of hold together and be a little bit more cooperative for separating. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rip this dough. And by the way, if you've built enough strength, this is going to be hard, which is a good thing, right? But I don't know if you can tell, but right now I can actually handle this dough. And while it is sticky, right? It is sticky. It will stick to my hand. It's staying stuck to itself instead of to my skin, if that makes sense. And that's what we're trying to do during bulk proofing. So I've got this into sort of 2 general loaves. I can already see this one's way smaller, so I'm just going to weigh them. So this weighs 850. This weighs 1,155, so we need like at least 100 grams out of this one. So see, a nice strong dough. If you want to rip it, you have to fight it, right? If this was a recently mixed dough, you would have been able to just scoop it out. So let's do this. So we're at 1,004 with this one now. 999. That's close enough. Okay. So I've got basically 2,000 gram loaves. My dough fermented 3.5 hours. Okay, Natty. So it sounds like you mixed your dough. You did stretch and fold. Depends how many stretch and folds you did, right? Because remember that your dough actually started proofing as soon as you mixed it. You let it bulk proof on the counter 3.5 hours. You pre-shaped it and shaped it. You stuck it in the fridge for 5 hours, and by the time you got it out, it was overproofed. Something's definitely happening there. We'll figure it out. Don't worry. Let's see. Okay, so we've got our dough, which was mixed and stretched and folded several times, separated into bulk proofing containers. What I always do with the bulk proofing container is I just give it like one last stretch and fold in the bulk proofing container. So as you can see now with the stretching and folding, the dough is like, it's one. You know what I mean? It's fused. I can tell from experience and from the feel of it that this dough has enough strength in it, right? So I'm going to take this dough like this. Stretch and fold this one, right? Nice and strong. Beautiful dough. So we've successfully activated our starter by feeding it. We've gotten up, we've mixed it, all of our ingredients are in there, they're in the right amounts. We've done stretching and folding, we've built strength, and now we're going to set ourselves up for successful bulk proofing. So what I do with these doughs is I push them down into the bulk proofing container, sort of like as level as I can get them to go, but you'll see in a sec that they never fully cooperate, and that's where our marker comes into play. So we'll get these down in here, sort of as even as we can. Then I'll get my hands clean so that I can handle my marker. People always ask me what size my bulk proof container is. As long as your bulk proofing container is like about double the size of your dough to allow for room to grow, you're fine. So I get the lid on these like this. Then I'm going to show you how to mark your dough so that you can gauge how much it's risen properly. So, and I need to face myself, but let's do this. Like this. Like this. Right. Okay, so what I've done is I've marked the height of the dough where it sits on the container. And I understand that as this dough rises, unlike yeast bread, it's going to spread rather than rise, right? So when I go to check this dough 4 hours from now, what I'm going to end up seeing is that the dough is actually going to be very close to this height, but it's going to have expanded to that height all the way around. So over here, where it was only about 1/4 of an inch tall, it's now up here. It's actually like quadrupled, right? Whereas over here, it might have only looked like it's been a 10% rise, right? Over here, it'll have like nearly doubled, right? That's what makes these containers so amazing. You can actually see the dough. You can mark where it started, right? If you're going to skip cold proofing, then what we suggest is that you let your dough rise to 100%. If you're going to do cold proofing, we recommend that you let your dough rise to 75%. Then the next step is to pre-shape our dough. So that means we take our very sticky risen dough out of our bulk proofing container. We dump it onto the counter. We don't use any flour or water. We just use a bench scraper and start building tension into that dough. So it's going to start out very sticky. We're going to try not to touch it with our hand except as we have to. And we're just going to start to work our way around this dough nice and gently. And what it's going to do is create like a skin, a film on the outside that's not sticky to the touch. And it's going to trap lots of air and pressure into the dough. We'll let it sit for a bit, then we'll shape it, right? So we'll get it into, that's where, you flip it over, you spread it out, you make the pamphlet, you roll the ends, you make it the actual shape of your bread. We will then, from that point, either dump it into our cold proofing, bannetins or whatever container we're going to use as a bannetin, or we're going to lift it right onto some floured parchment, score it, and bake it. If your dough is a little overproofed, the pre-shaping process is going to help reduce that stickiness enough and build some tension and additional strength into the bread so that you can at least get it shaped and get it into your oven, right? Oven spring is when your bread goes from being this high before it goes into the oven to really like growing. Somebody just sent like a huge amount of hearts into I've never seen that happen before. Whoever just did that, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I don't know who did that, but this whole like hearts just happened. That was really cool. I've never seen that before. Um, Oh, yes. Okay. So if your bread is a little cold proof, so you did everything right. You put your dough into your bulk proofing containers. Then you just meant to go to the grocery store and ended up stopping over at your friend's house for a glass of wine. And now it's been 9 hours and you come home and your dough's way up here. Don't throw it out. Use pre-shaping, right? Pre-shaping is going to make it so that you can at least shape your bread and get it into the oven. One last little trick that you can use for oven spring, right? We have what's called a functional score. A functional score allows steam to escape the bread. So what's happening when you're baking your bread is it's building up steam inside. And as that steam builds up, the bread starts to rise inside the oven. And eventually it needs to, there it is again. Whoever did that, that's awesome. I love it. Um, that was cool. So as it is like this in the oven, it'll go pop and the steam will escape, right? This functional score is going to encourage that to happen, right? And with overproof bread, what happens is the score that we cut, because the bread is falling so quickly, ends up falling and fusing to itself. So one last thing you can do for overproof bread is check it after 10 minutes of baking. And if it looks like that scored line is starting to fuse together, cut it again. You might get some oven spring. So there's lots of ways to fix things. Let's see, so I'm now cold proofing and left my dough in the fridge in my silicone bannettons for 30 hours. I baked this morning and they turned out quite spectacular. I'm so happy. Everybody, Lisa's been following along for a while and has put lots of comments in, and we've troubleshooted, and she's just she's doing really, really good. So that makes me happy to hear. Lisa said that. And Susan says, thank you for sharing your knowledge. I'm learning so much. We'll be checking out your links. Awesome. I'm glad. I really love this. It's super fun. Amanda says it was my hand. Some people are telling me that those hearts are happening in the group if I do that. But when it was when I was doing like my super expressive, let's get our bread to spring thing that I do. I don't know. It's not working. You made the hearts. When you made the heart shape with your hands, do it again. You're doing it. Do a heart with your fingers. No way. Really? How did I make that happen? Now it's not happening. Okay, so what we were talking about was we've got our bread in the oven and we're trying to make it spring. Oh my gosh. Maybe it'll never happen ever again. Let's give this its third stretch and fold. Okay, so we mixed this loaf of bread at the beginning of our live that we just started today. Okay, when we first mixed it and it was a shaggy dough, if I stuck my hand in it and pulled my hand away, it came out covered in dough that I had to like pick off my hand. And if I tried to pick it up, it would rip, right? Now, look, elastic, strength. This is what we're trying to do with stretching and folding. Very little dough stuck to my hands, right? So I think with this live, there was like a really good opportunity to see strength actually being built into the dough. So what's going to happen with this dough is I'm going to give it one more stretch and fold, and then I'm going to get it into the bulk proofing containers. Let's just say I have a notebook full of them now after just a few videos. Thank you for the tips. Oh, good. I'm really glad. Yeah, and like I said, there's like in the description of this video, there's all of the tutorials that we recommend. Both of our ebooks are in there. One focuses on mastering the essentials. It's got like all the stuff you'd want to know, like what are the advanced processes and what are the essential processes and when do we use them? What's baker's math? There's a glossary, like there's all of that stuff in the book. It's like 34 pages. And then there's a discard book, but there's like individual things where like if you like to read it, then there's a written tutorial. If you like to watch it, then there's a video tutorial. I learned so much already. Awesome. Cool. I don't know how we got hearts. I did it. That's so cool. I didn't know. I don't know if you guys saw it, but this is what we can do. How do we? Anyways, apparently I can only do it if I'm not trying, but I did try that one time. Well, thank you all for being here today. I think this is fun. I really like doing these lives. I like sourdough. It's a good thing because I didn't expect the group to get quite so big quite so fast, but now that it is, we're having lots of fun. I appreciate all of you being here. Definitely comment on the post if you've got any questions. I'll be happy to help you. And who knows, maybe I will be not busy enough later or not too busy later to get to work on pre-shaping with these loaves. But if not, it's okay. There's lots of videos on pre-shaping, and I'll definitely post some pictures and feedback on how these loaves turned out. So thanks, guys. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you so much. I'm really glad they're helping you. Thanks for being here. And we'll talk to you all again soon. Happy baking, everyone. Bye for now.